Man to Men is for men like me. My name is Josh Robinson, and I live in Norman, Oklahoma, where I work at Simple Modern and earnestly seek the presence of God. I hope you enjoy this episode.
This is Man to Men, the audio journal for Christian men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove with you for another in-depth conversation with some courageous leaders, and today we have the co-hosts of Remnant Radio, Joshua Lewis and Michael Miller. Remnant's premise is simple. Let's discuss theology with everyone. Remnant invites Baptists, Methodists, Anglicans, Pentecostals, Presbyterians, Lutherans, and Charismatics to come on the live air and have profitable theological discussions. The heart of Remnant is that it reminds its audience every episode we don't necessarily agree with all the views of our guests, but we're eager to learn about how different traditions look at the scriptures. They do 2 shows a week on YouTube with over 150,000 viewers, and they get over 1 million downloads and views a month across the podcast and video spectrum. Remnant's recently expanded to provide in-person conferences as well as online masterclasses, and you can keep up with the latest events and activities with Remnant through their newsletter, which we'll share a little bit about today. Joshua Lewis and Michael Miller, welcome to Man to Men.
Thanks for having us. I don't know what happened. Right as we went live, my camera, I lost it. So happy to be here. Sorry that you see me kind of
that's
shuffling
fine.
over
Well,
here.
Our YouTube viewers will forgive you, and the audio people won't know the difference.
Wonderful.
Yeah. We strive to be authentic here at Man to Men. So, so I've known you guys a long time, been a viewer of Remnant Radio, gotten to just really get to know you men as brothers over the years, just getting to interact personally in different spaces. Can you share with our guys as we start to enter into how to have a profitable theological discussion? Because again, this is your day job. This is what Remnant Radio does. Can you share some of the story and heart and maybe the genesis behind Remnant Radio first?
Michael and Michael are both, I would say, as equally founders in that, I spent the first year and a half trying to get Remnant off the ground, doing podcasts Monday nights at 8:30, for 2 hours, just kind of talking to people who want to talk theology. And we didn't really have much of a following, but like kind of building that base up, a couple hundred people watch every night. And then when Michael Miller came on in close to 2019, we hit it off really well. So I started in 2017 in July. By 2019 of like December-ish time, Michael Miller comes on, becomes the co-host. We film for a whole year. He goes and plants a church in Denver, Colorado. During that period, Michael Roundtree comes on. He becomes the co-host. And then a year after that, Miller's schedule kind of opens up a little bit from church planting, and we're able to get together and do a podcast together every Wednesday as a group. So talking about the gifts of the Spirit. So as far as like how it started, man, I was just a classical Pentecostal dude who wanted to talk theology. And I found that there wasn't a lot of people in my tradition that were really wanting to do that, and I wanted to learn. So I was just really excited and eager to kind of break outside of my personal theological echo chamber and learn from others outside of my own space. And that kind of just became the genesis of what we were. We just were honest. We didn't want to debate. We didn't want to argue. We just kind of wanted, not that that those things are bad. Debate and argue are good under certain conditions, right? But we just wanted to learn. So I was bored is the answer. That's why Remnant started, is because I was bored and I wanted to learn. And it was primarily for me, and the fact that other people liked that and they could kind of join that theological journey and grow with me was a kind of neat bonus. That was cool.
I love that, man. And I love that some of our listeners are going to get to hear from you guys and be exposed to Remnant and hopefully find it as a great resource for their own theological development and questions they're asking. One thing about you two, both Michael Miller, you, Joshua Lewis, and also your co-host, who's just not with us today, Michael Roundtree. One thing I admire about you guys, both in person and on the show, is that you three seem to have a very deep camaraderie and friendship. Would you mind sharing with us what has been a challenge in putting the show together with that friendship? What makes it sweet doing it as friends together? And how do you three maintain that friendship and that camaraderie over the years, over time and distance?
Oh man. So there's a lot to that question.
Yeah, I think it was 5 questions, which is my style.
Yeah. Well, and I don't feel like it's been that much of a challenge to work with these guys to begin with. And the reason why it hasn't been a challenge is because these guys share some very similar values. Both Josh and Michael, and I mean, part of the motivation why I even wanted to do this was because I loved the gifts of the Spirit, but I didn't want to be a charismatic. I didn't want to be a Pentecostal. I wanted to be a normal evangelical, semi-liturgical. We take communion every week at my church. We do the Apostles' Creed at my church. I wanted to be a gift practitioner, but I didn't believe what the Pentecostals believed. And so that was a big value. We all wanted to see the power of God demonstrated through the gifts of the Spirit. We still cared about liturgy. We still cared about doctrine. We still cared about theology and history. So that was a huge commonality between the three of us. I think the other thing is there's a level of, this is going to sound so arrogant. I don't mean it this way, but I think, when I look at Josh and Michael, they seem to care about the right things. Integrity matters. And so when it comes to being truthful and being honest and willing to own our mistakes when we've said something that we thought was true and then later realized maybe it wasn't. Recently with the Mike Bickle stuff, we just removed all of the Bickle content that we had because we realized he wasn't the man we thought he was, and then had to give a public acknowledgement of that fact. And so, and the other thing is, we've cared about this content to such a degree that we wanted to spread it to as many people as possible. And that was our main ambition. We wanted the gifts of the Spirit to be accessible and yet people to love theology and doctrine. And so that as a mission and a vision, has also allowed the things that would normally create conflict to be pushed aside because we see something a little bit bigger than ourselves in that. And we just don't have a lot that we're holding on to. I think when I started doing the podcast, I had lost everything. I had lost my job at my church, just been fired. I had been blacklisted and blackballed and then slandered and lost every friend I had. And so Josh and Michael, their value for what was right and what was good and what was true really was on full display with me. And so that also kind of knit us together. I got to see what these guys were made of. They got to see what I was made of and what honesty and integrity looks like and how much it matters to them and to me. So that's been a huge, I don't know, Josh, am I leaving anything out there?
Well, I mean, as far as like, our relationship, I'm with you. I think we've all experienced common pain, and there's a military thing I remember learning in ROTC that misery loves company. So there's something to be said about these pain points that were being struck, I think all at the same time, or maybe even at different times, but we had carried some burdens with us, just from the charismatic background. We knew that this stuff was real. We all had that core value. We were like, yep, let's go after it. But then we also saw the pain that it inflicted. The guy I started Remnant Radio with, his senior pastor, I think became a cult leader. I mean, he was saying if he shut down all the campuses that they planted and they said, come back to the main campus. If you don't come back, then whatever demon we cast out of your life, we send it back in Jesus' name. Whatever sickness we healed you of, right? We send back that sickness. I mean, he was super manipulative, hyper controlling, really NAR kind of wacky charismaticness. But then at the same time, I've seen demons cast out. I've seen the sick get healed. I've seen prophetic words change the trajectory of people's lives and bear immense fruit. So there's this man, I know this is real, but I really just hate the way it's being exercised and practiced. And I just remember being in situations like early 2019, do we have to make another episode on the charismatic gifts? I'm so bored. I hate doing this. And Miller was like, Josh, if we don't do it, the only people who will are Elijah List, Destiny Image, and Charisma News, right? Not trying to,
or
cessationist
heresy hunters.
Podcasts. Feel free to edit this if you need to.
Or
heresy hunters, right? So we got to the point where it was we're doing this because it needs to be done, even more than probably we all feel like a huge love to do it. Because I'll be honest, there are times I just want to read, a big nerd book and talk about that. I don't really want to talk about tongues for the 7,000th time. But all that to say, it is something that needs to happen. And we want to kind of blaze that trail. So I think, again, to Michael's point, it really has been the fact that we actually like each other. And if the podcast didn't exist, we would still be friends. And the fact that we're all surrounded by those same kind of core values that drive us to continue in this kind of mission, I think it's been good.
Those of us that have been with the show and been around you guys for a while, that's just something I've always admired, and I think does draw people in. You guys are able to have those kinds of honest conversations with one another, and I think that spills over to your guests. And so, going back to some of the genesis for you guys, and starting to get into a lot of our topic today, as far as just helping some of our men and our listeners, from collegiates to retirees, have a profitable theological discussion. What were some of the theological echo chambers that you guys found yourselves in over time? And how did you recognize that's what you were in? And how did you recognize, hey, I need to do something different, or I need some help here?
I mean, I'll go down a laundry list for me, and then Miller can have a shot. I mean, I'd say dispensational thinking was a big one. Having to reread the Bible through a kind of covenant theology lens has been something that's extremely beneficial to me. Trying to figure out my soteriology, being raised quite Arminian, but then having deep love for my Calvinistic, Reformed leaning brethren, finding myself falling in love with Lutheran theology, Augsburg Confession, smaller and longer Lutheran catechisms, the work of Philip Melanchthon and Martin Luther has been shifting in my life, challenging, but like also, seeing the scriptures and being compelled, I really believe this, but like, I don't want to just invent a new doctrine, and then finding that it resonates actually in other places in Christian history that are outside of my tradition. That's been good. So I'd say soteriologically, even as meta, as so far back out as the way that we're looking, whether it be dispensational or covenantal, in its leaning, having a law gospel distinction, sacramental theology. I would say that they're the kind of symbolistic view of the sacraments, and really knowing that I can actually meet with God in the table. I meet with God in the fellowship of the brethren, with the preaching and teaching of the word. Like, there's something to be said about, I come to church not to be educated, not to worship, but I come to meet with God and receive his good gifts. Yeah. So like that whole paradigm has been something that has been very formative for me. But yeah, no, I mean, you could mention a theology probably, and I'd be like, yeah, that's changed in the past, 7 or 8 years of Remnant Radio. Yeah, it's probably touched every area, I would imagine.
How about you, Michael?
I mean, I'll be short on this, but similarly to Josh, like, I wasn't as sacramental as I am today. And when I thought about what the sacraments were, I just thought baptism and communion. Today I feel very differently about that. One of the episodes we did with a Church of Christ guy, which is not somebody we would interact with. We don't believe in baptismal regeneration. And so here we are. I'm listening to an episode. I wasn't even in the interview, but I'm listening to the episode where this guy says, his wife had passed on. And he says, when I want to be with my wife, I don't visit the gravesite. I go to church. And it's like, when you go to church and you partake in communion and you worship and sing together, you're joining in with the great cloud of witnesses. And so he talks about the gathering of the saints as though it is also sacrament. I thought that was mind blowing to me. I had never heard it talked about that way. And I was like, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like, the Lord is with us in some way when we gather on that day, in a way that he's not with us when I'm gathering with some brothers and sisters in a coffee shop. And that's not to say that God's not with us in the coffee shop. I just don't know, like, it's different. And I don't know how that different displays itself. I'm kind of fine with leaving it in that place of mystery, but that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had this podcast and I was interacting with people outside of my, evangelical sort of bubble. So that's been a huge win for us. And then also interacting with people in some ways, interacting with people I disagree with has actually further solidified certain beliefs that I did have already. Like, when it comes to second blessing theology, I was already on the third wave side of this, that the baptism spirit happens when you believe. Well, then I, started debating some Pentecostals and, hearing their best arguments. And I'm kind of going, actually, I'm further on my side now. Though I love them and respect them, and it's created a way to have ecumenical conversations and realizing, like, there's other people out there who wants to have a constructive conversation where it's not super heated, or even if it gets heated, it's still good. And Josh and I used to disagree about, can a Christian have a demon? And And yet we would enjoy the conversation. We would be on two sides, really arguing with one another. And we do that on camera and off camera. And so, there's a way to have those conversations where it actually is fellowship, and it's not this thing that's going to tear the other person down, because we're not feeling threatened by our positions being torn down. Because we're not questioning orthodox positions, we're questioning tertiary doctrines. And so we sort of have these categories that we now put our doctrines in.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you guys
it's super important for the church to see friends disagree on camera.
Yeah.
Like, right. We're not, nobody's like out to win or to humiliate the other. We're just looking for truth. And we actually kind of presuppose before the dialogue that maybe we're both wrong, and so like that creates a level of humility where we go, okay, let's just reason together with the scriptures. And I think that's one of the reasons people love Remnant, is because we have a level of willful humility. Like we're just like, maybe. And
we josh with Roundtree all the time. He's on the Calvinist side. You and I are not. So we give him all the time about a hard time about irresistible grace and things like that. It's just fun. So yeah.
Well, can you guys help walk us through, like, what are some of the earmarks of a theological conversation gone south? And how do we pull back from that? Just kind of coach us through, because we've got listeners from guys who are in a college accountability group together to men who've been leading the same Bible study for the last 25 years. How can we tell, and what are some of the earmarks that a theological conversation's gone south?
I check the emotions, right? So for me, when I feel energized, I'm going, hold on, I'm not just defending a doctrine right now. There's something else I'm defending, right? There's something in my heart, some message about me or about the world around me that makes me feel unsafe. There's something there that's really the issue. It's no longer a theological conversation. And so I'm usually looking for that in someone else. Like there's been a couple times where I've been, I was with a former Calvary Chapel guy, and, his church had brought me out there to speak at his church, and they wanted to speak on, prophecy and hearing God and casting out demons. And I'm like, okay, well, before you have me speak on that, let's talk about that a little bit, because it's one thing to talk about those things. It's another thing to see them. And you can say all day long, you believe that, people can have demons get cast out of them. But then when you actually see it in practice, you go, I don't know if I want that in my church. And so, I'm having this kind of debate with this guy. And the big question is, can a Christian be demonized? And I noticed at one point, he's really angry. And so I kind of stopped the conversation. I said, hey, listen, I'm not trying to be rude by saying this, but I don't think this conversation is any longer about whether or not a Christian can have a demon. There's something else going on right now that's causing you to have a level of energy and emotion behind this that really doesn't have much to do with this conversation. And so I find that to be the case often is things go south when you realize somebody else has something else at stake, and it's not just the right or wrongness of this particular position. It's something going on internally and personally. And so that usually is the indicator to me that this conversation it shouldn't continue as it currently is.
Yeah, I think we ruin theological conversations before they start by taking assumptions into the conversation. Most of the time, about the character of a person, their desire. So like if I come into a conversation and I'm talking to an egalitarian, okay, and my assumption coming into the conversation is that this person has been really wooed away by the cultural waters of our day. They've just been lured away by the just hyper-feminism of our culture, and they're just acquiescing to culture, and they're not coming to this conclusion from scripture. They're just bowing their knee and just trying to make the Bible say things it isn't saying. And then that egalitarian comes to the conversation to the complementarian, and they just assume that they're like male chauvinists from a dead system of religion that is here to oppress women. Well, they both come to the conversation with rather an ad hominem presupposition about the other. Like, hey, I can't listen to you, I can't hear you, because you're evil, right? Like, because there's something about you that is, it's like, having a Democrat and a Republican sit in a room and have a conversation. It's a tribalism. It is it's a spirit of the age, frankly. I mean, I hear you are charismatics talking about demons and in tongues over and over again. So let's just beat that charismatic drum, that the spirit of the age. And I just mean like the mindset of people is we don't want to get down to the nitty gritty. We want to just like have our talking points. We want to be like, closed border, gun rights, abortion. Like we just want to talk about the things that are important to us, but we don't want to like sit down, unpack those things, nuance those things, discuss those things, because our opponent is a Nazi or our opponent is a chauvinist or a fascist or whatever title you want to make up. Right. We can't talk to them because they're the bad guy. And I think that is something Christians don't do. There are Christians who do it, but I just don't think that they ought. It's like Christians don't get divorced. Like Christians don't do this. This is not a thing that Christians should do. And I'm not saying that they can't, but that they shouldn't. So there's that. But then there's also, I think, this kind of assumption. I've seen how this works because it's a theology of pragmatism, right? We talk about pragmatism and how it's bad with our churches. Smoke screens and light shows and all that stuff. We're doing it because it works. That's a bad reason to do something. Well, I'll tell you, the same thing happens with theology. People will say, I knew a Calvinist once who didn't do evangelism. And then they say, therefore it doesn't work. Therefore it should not be true. And they say, like, because of what I've seen this theology do, that pragmatism, therefore I can't adopt that theology. The problem is that that's anecdotal evidence, and you can find anecdotal evidence on the other side. I know dozens of Calvinists who are the best evangelists, persistent evangelists that I know. I know charismatics who are wackadoodle, so therefore let's get rid of charismaticism. Well, that's not what Paul did in Corinth. He didn't say, because there is disorder among you, therefore shut this all down. No, he actually just gave corrective instruction on how to do it rightly. So I would say that assuming the worst about the person that you're sitting with is what kills the conversation. And then also taking a kind of pragmatism of downstream, seeing where this theology leads downstream, and then taking that into our biblical interpretation. That those are two things I think that sabotage our conversation frequently. Yeah. I have 1,000 examples of that, but I think that was sufficient.
No, I know you do. And you guys have just given us a good kind of just a beginning diagnostic to conversation killers when it comes to theology. So as I'm listening to you guys and the other guys are listening to you too, a lot of theological terms being thrown out, and it's shorthand for you guys, and I'm tracking with you.
Sorry about that.
No, you don't have to apologize. Sorry. Again, this is your day job. I think it's great because, and so, home listeners, if you hear something, go look it up, Google it, write it down, jump into that. And that's the genesis of my next question, which is, where would you men point other brothers who are saying, I want to be more theologically serious? It all seems very daunting. Where was that start for you guys as far as starting to look at your theology? What's a good maybe a primer or a good place or places to start for men who want to get serious about what they think about God?
This may not be a primer in theology, but it'd be a primer in understanding your Bible. That gives you, I think, charismatics in particular would do well to have. I mean, evangelicals, Baptists, people who are in seeker-sensitive churches where often it's a moral lesson rather than a teaching from the Scripture. This would help them immensely. Go read How to Read Your Bible for All It's Worth by Gordon V. Right here. I think it's an easy read. It's not too high theology. Doesn't use a lot of big words. I think our podcast is a great primer. You can find anything you want on there because we've literally talked about almost every kind of topic in Christendom.
We have had this question ourselves. So, Jared, I've actually shared this with you. We have written, I don't know, we spent 7 days writing. We wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages on an introduction to Christian theology, walking through the Nicene Creed, unpacking historic Christian faith with a lot of the language that I'm using right now kind of pulled out of it to the best of our ability. So I would say that would be a great place to start. That content will be filmed and published by the fall. But as far as, immediate places, How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, Gordon V is a great book. I would say good systematic theology. If you're an average person, you're just out there kind of hanging out and you're like, man, I'm not a big avid reader. Yeah, most of us aren't avid readers. I'm extremely dyslexic.
Well, to be fair, I think neither Josh nor I have a seminary degree. Yeah, we're both novice. Right. We're not even theologians. That's right. Don't mistake that.
Yeah, starting with the philosophy of it all. Like, let's say, hey, you should learn Spanish. And okay, cool. I'm going to take Spanish 1, 2, and 3. So it's 3 years of Spanish in high school, and it's like you can come out of 3 years of Spanish in high school, knowing how to order a burrito and find a bathroom, and lose all of it in 6 months without practice, right? I know other missionaries who will go to Argentina and in 6 months will be fluent in the language by just living with missionaries and having to speak the language every day, all the time. And what that teaches us is that you learn language through immersion. And a lot of people are going, hey, this is so daunting. I don't know what to do. So that's what it feels like to be a missionary in Argentina. You just parachute in and you immerse yourself. I would say if you're going to start and you're not a big reader, go Google Systematic Theology by Wayne Grudem on your podcast, whatever podcast player you use. He's got like 200 lectures on theology that'll just, and you don't even have to agree with them. I'm just saying it'll give you categories to work through. And I remember doing that as a Pentecostal Armenian, just listening to Wayne Grudem, didn't agree with anything that he'd said. But I was like, hey, this is free seminary, right? Like that's what it is. It is free seminary.
Really
and
is.
You can jump online and listen to this stuff. Bible Project's a great spot to do. They have their online classrooms that are free. You can just like take courses on Genesis. You can take courses on, I think they're going to do one pretty soon on, was it the Beatitudes? Or maybe it's just like the Sermon on the Mount. I think it's Sermon on the Mount that they're doing this year.
Oh yeah, they're doing that one right now, actually.
Yeah, all year is Sermon on the Mount. So they have series on Exodus. Anyway, so like there's a lot of good resources out there. But I think
Mike Winger's podcast.
Mike Winger is the best, man. I love Mike.
He does. I mean, by example, he teaches you how to think biblically, which is called the Bible thinker. But I think the way he teaches is also teaching you.
No, that's helpful, man. Yeah, I think because I think a lot of guys are listening to you guys and they're picking up some things. Maybe they've heard these words, maybe they haven't, and that's one reason I want to have you guys on, because you think seriously about the Bible and about how we think about God. In that, and we'll get to the Bible here in a minute. You're both avid readers. You really are. I wish that I had some of the energy that the two of you have. That I've just seen over the years, to be able to intake so much reading, so many big ideas, and put them into a simple explanation. So you read a lot, is my nice way of saying that. What other books are you guys both reading right now that you're actually enjoying? So I get it, pastors and theologians, we got to read books all the time that we have to read. But what book or books are you reading right now that you're enjoying and that you'd recommend?
Man, I'm kind of working through a couple of different works. I mean, I got through 11 chapters of Ben Witherington. I think that's the chunk of it. Jesus the Seer. And Ben is, again, a very Armenian dude. I mean, I think that this ancient Near Eastern cultures talking about prophecy was a really interesting read. He's talked about diviners and prophets in ancient Near Eastern cultures outside of Judaism, Middle Bronze Age period up to the apostles, and that's what this book kind of follows. Is starting with the sociocultural economic kind of background of what a prophet was, and then putting that into the Jewish context and then into the Christian context, and saying the ancient Near Eastern people knew what these words mean and knew what these roles were, and that's why there's not a lot of explaining and unpacking of them. And that was just fascinating to me. Lots of really great insights there. Again, this is going to make it sound like we do nothing but charismatic content. We did a recent episode on baptism. There's a book by J.V. Fesco on baptism that I enjoyed quite a bit. Miller, you pick up one. Let me think of another good answer of something I've been reading recently.
So you'll find with me, I'm always diving into something really theological, and then I'm always diving into something really deliverance oriented right now, or gifts oriented. I don't like reading a lot of books on the gifts in general. I find most charismatic books aren't always super solid in their exegesis. However, there are books that I find really interesting on the topic of deliverance. Like I was just reading and probably read through twice now, a book on what Christians in the early church, like what's the belief about, can Christians be demonized? I can't find the book now suddenly. I also just read Derek Prince's book on, breaking curses. It's pretty weird. And then at the same time, I'm reading this, an introduction to early Judaism. And so I've been, getting getting into like the Essenes, what they find there, stuff about the Septuagint, by Douglas Woodward. He talks about sort of the conspiracy that took place at Jamnia in around 150 AD, where they actually probably butchered some of the Masoretic text that has made its way into our King James Bible, which most people are not going to like that conversation. I find it fascinating. I'm also super interested in all things Second Temple when it comes to like weird stuff like Enoch, and so I get into some fringe things just for personal entertainment and interest. But I do a ton of prayer for healing and deliverance, and so I'm always finding something there, and then at the same time reading something theological. Like I also have my bookmarks and 3 different commentaries on Deuteronomy right now, and I'm about to do the same thing with Revelation. I just ordered Patrick Schreiner. Is it Patrick Schreiner? Is it Tom Schreiner?
Patrick Schreiner on Revelation.
I think so, yeah.
No, Tom Schreiner probably.
Is it? I can't remember. I just got his book on Revelation. Yeah, so
does Patrick have a book on Revelation? Yeah, I must have missed that.
I don't know. I get the two of them mixed up somehow. But either
Patrick's
way,
the younger. Tom's dad.
Is it okay? They're related. Didn't know that.
Father and son.
Either way, I just ordered some of their stuff on Revelation, so I'm probably going to be diving into 3 different commentaries on that, because I still don't know where I land on some of that. I tend to think a lot of it is metaphor and symbol, and not to be taken at face value all the time, like our dispensationalist friends would say. So.
Yeah. Well, Tom, just to weigh into that, like Patrick, I think he wrote the book on the Ascension that I think was magical. It was so good. So just in the last couple of weeks, Remaking the World. It's Thinking Through 1776 by Andrew Wilson.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah. Just came out.
That was a great book. It's got a very rise and triumph of the modern self feel to it. Just thinking of like why we are with the way that we are post 1776. And it's more than just the Declaration of Independence. It has, involvement with just like romanticism, the kind of, thought there, like the advancement of industrialism, those kinds of things are all kind of emerging around this period of time. And he just very, very insightful writing. It's kind of more of a sociology kind of worldview of like selfhood and how that affects our perception. Paul Copan on the monster God, that was fantastic. Like dealing with those Old Testament texts that are difficult and problematic. We read that like last month or 2 months ago. That was a really good one. The one I'm working on right now is The Law and the Gospel by Ernie. I have a hard time pronouncing his last name. I think it's Ressinger. But it's a really good book. But I love law gospel distinction. It's part of like that Lutheran background, or that desire of like, oh man, I really enjoy this. For people out there who are like, what's law gospel distinction? It basically says that every passage of scripture can fall under 2 categories, sometimes both: law that says us to do, and the gospel that tells us it's done. So the law is perfectly fulfilled in Christ. The law causes us, 1, to stand condemned under the weight of the law, causing us to look outside of ourselves for righteousness. Has a second effect. It shows us who God is by his nature and his character, but it also shows us by the power of the Spirit how we are to rightly please God in our active service. So love your wife like Christ loved the church. That is a law command, believe it or not. Because there's a weight to it. I stand condemned. I can't love my wife like Christ loves the church. I have to look outside of myself for righteousness. Secondly, it shows me who God is. Look how he loves, how he sacrifices, how he gives all of himself. Like it's displaying the character and the nature of God. But also it shows me that I need the power of God by the work of the Spirit to fulfill this word so that I can rightly worship God. So it's not earning my salvation, but it's showing me how I worship him rightly. So the gospel says it's done. The gospel says that Christ perfectly fulfilled this law. He's imputed to me his righteousness. It's good news. So every verse of scripture can point in those directions. And I find the law gospel distinction extremely helpful as a preacher. So I don't conflate these 2 things. I think it was Spurgeon who said, anyone who knows the difference, and I'm butchering this quote, by the way, anyone who knows the distinction between the law and the gospel is a master in divinity. Like that is such an important thing that we don't get those things confused or conflated in our proclamation. yeah, those are the three ones I would probably mention most recently.
No, that's really good. Thank you, man, for the recommendations. And if you guys are driving around listening to this, you can go back and write down some of those recommendations. There's some really good ones in there. Speaking of recommendations,
just gave us time to geek out.
That's it. Just want to get you started talking. Here's one that I hope you'll have some strong opinions on. You guys have done hundreds of episodes of Remnant Radio. What are some of your favorite episodes that you think our men should go check out?
I know one for sure is, this will be for my charismatic brothers and sisters out there, and the one we did on Gnosticizing the Scriptures, or any of the series we did on Stop Doing That to Scripture, where you got Nicolas Cage on the thumbnail. This is brilliant. So we talk about how that in that episode, how people in charismatic worlds are actually butchering the Scriptures, or how those in the seeker sensitive world are doing the same thing with moral therapeutic deism, which is a term coined by a sociologist named Christian Smith, to talk about how we moralize the Scriptures rather than teaching them. And really, we care about getting good moral lessons rather than actually a life-giving God that we die to ourselves and live for. I think other ones, Josh. I mean, those were old. I like the stuff we did on bad charismatic practice, the stuff that was sort of correctional in nature. That one's got quite a number of views. Anything we've done with Ken Fish, I mean, stuff on the Freemasons is fascinating, or some of his weird stories on deliverance. I think those are fun and somewhat informative, but.
Here's a few that come to mind for me. I'm thinking of the Sacrament of the Assembly, which Miller has already mentioned. John Mark Hicks, he's a Church of Christ guy. Another one that I was thinking through was Sam Storms came on to talk about Christian mysticism. I thought that was really interesting.
It is interesting.
It's talking about the medieval period. It's not like Gnosticism. We're not talking about like early Christian wackadoodles, but just like experiencing the Lord in a our kind of historic Christian sort of way. I thought that was very helpful. Then I think our stuff with Paul Copan is very interesting. I think penal substitution is under attack as penal substitution. A bunch of fancy language. I'm sorry, Jared. For those of you who are listening, that Christ took our place, died for us because sin cost something, right? Like penal code was broken. It has to be justified. Some price has to be paid. And Christ comes in and pays that debt, right? So that concept is under attack, and it seems to be under attack because the wrath of God is viewed as like this bad thing. The judgment of God is viewed as this bad thing. And we don't want to be punished for sin, right? Because we like to live our lives how we want to live it. So it seems as if this whole worldview that has been very unseparated in any way from the Protestant tradition, and I would say the vast majority of the Christian tradition has been under so much attack recently, that the work of Paul Copan, our episodes on atonement theory, I would say are super important right now. And I'm with Miller. Our stuff on Scripture, I'm a big fan of. Me and Roundtree did an episode on the sufficiency, the inerrancy, the authority of Scripture. We kind of just pulled everything out of 2 Timothy, 3:16, those verses there, and then biblical authority after Babel with Kevin Van Hooser was a super good episode. I don't know. I could talk all day about it. Just depends on what people are looking for. You know, if you're in hey, I'm looking for some charismatic stuff, man, I got a litany of episodes for you. If you're like, hey, I really want to learn about ecclesiology, the church governance, great. I've got 6 episodes I would really recommend. Like you said, we have 800 videos online. So when you've been making content that much, it
blurs together.
It's hard to have content you haven't talked about at that
Absolutely.
point.
What's amazing is that we still have episodes we still want to do. There's a lot of stuff we still want to talk about, which means it hasn't ended yet. It's not like every time we think we've come to the limit of show ideas, we suddenly find a whole bunch. And then, we go through seasons where we need very little inspiration because we already have so much to talk about. And then times where we need it, we have to get together and brainstorm. But
bearing God's name with Carmen Imes.
Oh, that was good. Anything done with Carmen Imes has been amazing.
She's the best.
Yeah. I loved when you guys had Craig Keener on and just had him walk through the book of Mark seemingly by memory.
It was by memory. He didn't look at a single note.
It was by memory.
That was incredible. Just that entire series.
It's not just he didn't just know all of Mark. He knew all the ancient literature that he could draw from, and he didn't look at a single note. It just was all in his head.
Bible Rain Man. It's so crazy.
I mean, it's like, uncanny.
He will forget more than I will ever learn. Like
sitting in those interviews for us, we were like, this is the best experience. It's like sitting under a rabbi. I mean, like this is what it must have been like, like that kind of thing.
Felt that way
insights. Oh, I mean, here's the crazy thing is we would ask him questions and he'd say, no, don't ask that. Ask this instead.
That is a good rabbi.
We would go through our questions. He goes, why did you skip those 4 verses? And we're like, what 4 verses? He doesn't have a Bible in front of him.
Yeah.
He's like, well, you asked this question about this verse and this question about this verse, but then you didn't ask this question about these verses. He's like, you've got to ask me these questions because, and then he starts quoting some ancient church father from memory. Like he says this about that. And I'm like,
at all.
Oh no, he's the gentlest person ever.
Mm-hmm. Sweetest man alive. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
So
it's
true.
Wild.
Hey, so other side of that question, and you mentioned it a little bit at the opening with having to take down some of the Bickle episodes, but are there episodes of Remnant that you're just thinking, man, I wish that one would go away?
Michael Rowntrie's very first interview with Josh Lewis.
You can't tell. That's embarrassing. That's not. You shouldn't do that.
Oh, that's great.
We were debating something. I'm going to leave it. We won't get into the details. We were debating something, and Rowntree had been a pastor for a really long time and hadn't really like been sharpened by like someone who disagreed with him. And it like today, if we had the same conversation, he would take me to task, right? Like he would no question. Totally. He would bury me. But the reality of the situation, and this is why we love Remnant, is it's good for us. It makes us better pastors. Totally. It makes us better theologians and better readers all around. So, anyway, so it was, he asked me, he's like, hey Josh, could you pull that video? It's like, it's kind of embarrassing. And I was like, yeah, buddy. He wasn't a co-host. We were just like, he was a guest. We were just having a conversation. And anyway, like I said, today he would, he'd bury me under the same subject. So, there's that, we did an episode of this guy named Robert Letham. He wrote these books called God's Generals. Dude was so arrogant.
Robert's Lairden. Robert's Lairden. It is not Robert.
Not Letham. Letham's a different guy. I'm so sorry, guys.
Be nice.
Lairden.
Be nice.
Robert's Lairden.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like he's coming back.
No, he's not coming back. I pulled the episode. I mean, again, it was one of those things after the fact, I found out that he had like a bunch of affairs with like dudes. And then I was like, how does this guy coming on going to be so prideful? Like,
yeah, he was very condescending, talked down. It was almost like to ask the question that you ask, well, how dare you? Don't you know? Like that kind of attitude. And it's just not exactly, it's easy. It's the opposite spirit that we come to with the Remnant Radio. We're here to learn from one another and have conversations. We're not here to beat each other up with how dumb each other are when we ask these questions.
No, and like, here's the thing, guys, and people need to know this. If you're out there like, oh man, these guys are quoting a lot of like, they're using multi-syllable words to talk about theology. I'm severely dyslexic. Okay. So like, so dyslexic. So
you should see our show notes that Josh writes.
They're not good.
Like the spelling errors are, it's comical.
So many. So all that to say is like I probably read, 6 to 8 books in high school that weren't read to me, right? Like maybe. And then, after high school, like I didn't read. I didn't have to. I didn't want to. I hated it. So just to know that like theology is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It takes time. It's become something that I do. I read a book or 2 a week right now. It's closer to 1 right now. But there are tools, you've got Audible, you've got Scribed, which is now Ever&, different application now. But they just have all of the audiobooks online for $10 a month on Ever&. It's fantastic. I use an app called Speechify, and I can take photos or screenshots of images and it will read everything to me. So I will have a hard copy. That's what I did with this Jesus this year. I had a hard copy, had it read it to me. And then I was just kind of highlighting and working it through as I go. We are not particularly gifted And that's what I think is by God's
People would
grace.
feel differently, but that's true. Josh is dyslexic. I'm incredibly ADD and ADHD, diagnosed. And yet we have a love for theology, and conversations help a lot. So
yeah. And I think that should be encouraging, I hope, for the listener, that we're not particularly intelligent prior to coming to Christ, or particularly gifted. If God can use us, he can use anybody. As far as I'm concerned, it's the foolish things of the world confounding the wise. Like I teach theology for a living. No one who ever knew me all throughout youth, childhood, and or even into my early adulthood would be like, that guy's going to grow up to be a great teacher one day. no one ever, they're like, that guy will be a great, I don't know, servant. He's got such a servant's heart. That's what they said.
I was a B average student in all things. When I was in college at Texas A&M, I didn't do college. I just got by. I did Young Life. I did a ton of Young Life, but I got by in college.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and here you guys are. So I'm glad that you guys are doing what you're doing. You are blessing many people with your gifts. We're going to transition into a closing segment of the show that I call Everywhere, Every Day. And this is really just born out of my own natural curiosity about what do people do all day? Like, how do they kind of live and move and be? First thing, and I've got to ask you guys, so our audio listeners are not going to benefit from this question, but if you're seeing these guys or you watch Remnant online, you will know that these two have incredible beards. I have to ask you both.
Does help to be Jewish.
Well, and maybe that's part of the answer. What does beard care look like for you both?
I'm doing nothing.
Roundtree just takes a washcloth.
You
wipes
got
the dirt
a
off.
little bit of the fade going on. I mean, come on.
Not an ounce of oil, nothing. I mean, nothing. Like I have a guard on my little beard thing, and I hit it, once a week. And you'll notice it's like, today's Wednesday, right? So I've got a little bit of little aftershave going on here. I'll take I do have a straight razor, right? So like an old 50s, style, like blade. So I'll lather up and shave with a straight razor, once, maybe twice a week if there's a bunch of stuff going on. But I kind of I shave on Saturday night before Sunday, before I have to preach, right? So I don't have like a bunch of cuts on my face. And if I have something going on for the weekend, I might shave twice, but that's about the beard regiment. Nothing else is going on there.
All right.
I do even less than Josh. I wear a hat. Like, notice I have hair. I just don't ever do anything with it.
I wear a hat because I don't.
Dude, people just assume that I'm bald, but I'm like, no. We Jewish men don't lose our hair. We keep it.
Beautiful.
But I'm just lazy when it comes to that kind of stuff. I do minimal upkeep. I trim the beard every once in a while. So that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you guys do for physical fitness or workout? You got a routine, anything like that?
I work out every day. I go into the gym. I'll do a 5K typically, every day. And then I'll lift weights if I have time. And so, try to get a workout in once or twice a week with my wife, because it's a good time for us to connect, and, the kids are in school. But yeah, that's it. Nothing. I don't do anything crazy. Like, I wish, I see these people are doing CrossFit or jujitsu, and I'm like, I wish. I can't do that. I just kind of keep it simple and have a routine. And I just try to get as much in as I can when I'm there. But time commitment is hard to pull that off.
So, yeah. How about you, Joshua?
I'm kind of feeling the same place as far as like dad, pastor, podcaster. I travel and speak. Like, I'm. It's just, I don't know. I don't have work-life balance right now. It's just a whirlwind. So, I do push-ups,
that's great.
Pretty regularly, and body squats.
I take my running gear with me everywhere.
Yeah. So like,
I always check in luggage.
I'll start to get like mental fatigue, right? Like I'll start, hey, I'm reading for 2 hours and I'm done. It's like, okay, it's time to crank out 30 push-ups and do a couple body squats and then get back to it. So like I'll walk around, I live in Ada. I don't live on, let's be careful with divulging information. My studio is very close to Main Street, and I like to walk up and down Main Street, grab a good cup of coffee at Arbuckle. And so I'll do a little bit of walking, throughout the day, and low level exercise, not a ton.
It's great, man.
Yeah, Arbuckle is awesome, by the way. Anybody making their way through Ada, go hit up Kendall's Arbuckle Coffee. Free ad right there, Kendall.
The best coffee.
There it is. We'll see if we can get him as a sponsor.
Yeah.
Man, so what are for you guys are the places in the Bible? Told you we'd get there. What are the places in the Bible or the people in the Bible that are just home base for you? Now, this question is, you're not doing a plan. You're not prepping for a sermon or a show. You're not studying. You just get to read the Bible to enjoy it and go to your favorite places and people. Where are they?
It's hard to say, man. It changes over time. And part of it is because of what I'm interested in. Like right now, Moses all the way. Like I've taken the deep dive into Deuteronomy and I find him absolutely fascinating.
Oh yeah.
The connections with Moses and Jesus, the cares, the things that you see a lot of sarcasm, like the way he talks to Israel. And yet he's like a pastor who lovingly cared for these people that are, and he's not going to see him again. Like this is it. Yeah. They're crossing over the Jordan without him. And he's got this last thing to say. And so, and that last thing is Deuteronomy.
That's right.
I love that. I think it's so cool.
I mean, I think as a pastor, your favorite text is the one that you're preaching, right? So that's what Miller just confessed. And then I'm kind of in a similar place. I just taught verse by verse through Habakkuk at my church, and I love it. I would say though, if you're asking like over a period of time, if you had to point to an area, like where's that place that you go to rest in? Psalm 27, Psalm 63, Galatians is a big one that I always run to rest in. Again, this posture of the Lord's love is better than life, Psalm 63, seeking the face of the Lord, Psalm 27. Those are things that are important to me. I think there are things that I pursuit. It's one of the things that I'm thankful for my Pentecostal heritage. Where I think they got it wrong was they created a category of haves and have-nots based on whether you speak in tongues or not. You have the Spirit. So that's not great. I don't like that. But what I think they got right was this desire to pursue God more. And like, that's one area that it's so fruitful to my life and my enjoyment of God. And it's been an area that I want to continue to pursue. I want more of God in my life. And people who hear that, they go, but you have the Holy Spirit. You're saved. It's like, yeah. God, he lived in Israel. He lived in the tabernacle in a way he wasn't in the rest of Israel. He lived in the Holy of Holies in a way that he wasn't in the rest of the tabernacle. He lived in the Ark of the Covenant in a way that he didn't in the rest of, the holy place. So there's these concentric circles of having more of God. Yes, he's everywhere. Yes, he's omnipresent, but like there's more to be had. And I'm kind of in a space where I long to see the Lord, whether I do it in the land of the living, as the psalmist says in Psalm 27 or not, is not my decision. But I think it should be the heart of every Christian is to long to be with and see the Lord. And that's been, I don't know, it's been something that has been moving to me, keeps me on the right track.
Hey, thank you, man, for sharing that. Before we sign off for the day, you guys have talked a lot about, and I've seen this in your own lives, is that you're obedient men. You are gifted men, but I think you also walk in a lot of obedience to the Lord. How do you, and this is for both of you, how do you sense the Lord's direction for you personally? And can you share anything about the last time?
I feel like I'm firing on all cylinders right now in all these areas of my life that I love and have wanted to be able to do for years. And it's only been in the last, 4 or 5 years where I feel like that's actually been the case. Yeah. I don't know what the answer is. When it comes to walking in obedience, like you don't really know how obedient you are until you have to do something that's really like you really don't want to do, or it's going to cost you a lot. And so like there hasn't been much in the last 3 years really that I feel like has cost me a whole lot to do. Maybe Josh, you know me and you know my history, but like some of the harder decisions I had to make were 5 years ago.
I think, again, the wounds of the Lord, right, kind of make us who we are. And I think that there's a lot of pain that I feel vicariously through other people. And I just think people deserve better. I think maybe some of this is motivated by fear, like and probably in a non-healthy way. And I just have to admit that. But then the other part is just like Lord, let me not be, another pastor statistic of being an abusive leader, being a coward. I'm not afraid of being an abusive leader. I'm afraid of being a coward. I'm afraid of acquiescing to people who are big givers, people who, I will lose influence if I come against. That's what I'm afraid of. That I'm afraid of. My church, I take a salary from Remnant. I don't get paid for my church. They have a housing allowance, but I'm not allowed to look at numbers. I told them we're setting up this church where I will never see what anyone ever gives because I will not care. I will not be owned. I won't be bought.
I'm going to yell at him and tell him to start paying you.
There you go. Well, all that to say that
you're worth it.
I'm in a spot where
I'm going to ask to see the numbers.
I moved to Ada, Oklahoma to get away from the Dallas, Fort Worth. We'd get recognized where we would go. I'm not trying to pretend like we're a bigger deal than we are, but no, it
happens every time I go into Dallas.
Yeah. I'm afraid of celebrity Christianity. I want to murder it. And I am afraid of becoming a coward. And those are the two things that I'm trying to not be those things. So people will look at us and go, hey, you're super obedient. It's like, no, I'm terrified. I'm so aware of church history, and I'm so aware of all of these people who are biting the dust. You might look like bravery to you. It is cowardice to me. I'm telling you, I am freaking out. Everyone that I respect and love is falling left, right, and center. I'm just like, okay, Lord, with fear and trembling, don't take your spirit from me, right? Just lead me through paths of righteousness for your name. I don't know what else to do. And I'm a young dude, so part of this has to do with, having an awareness of that and just being careful.
I don't know how obedient I am. I'm thinking of a day to day. How many times do I preach the gospel in a week? Did I come to a person at a register and actually do that? No, I get about my own business half the time. There's things I could be way more obedient in that are plainly stated in scripture that I'm not doing super well. I wish I could say my church had grown because we're doing evangelism really, really well, but we're not. That's the truth. We have room to grow. So I don't know. I might need to push back on that statement.
No, man, I don't I'm with you. I think it's easy. It's perception, right? Everyone looks braver. Everyone's a better communicator. Everyone's better, at something. And the grass is always greener on that side.
Well, you guys just did for us what you often do on your show, which is you lead by example in your conversations. So thank you, fellas, for sharing that with us today and just for coming on. Remind the men how they can tune in to Remnant Radio and find you guys.
Sure. Any major podcast platform or YouTube, type in The Remnant Radio. You can Google us too. We come up on basically everything: YouTube, Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, all of it.
You can also see us on the podcast of people who don't like us.
Oh yeah. If you Google Remnant Radio, just know when you walk in the middle of the road, you get hit by both sides of traffic. So.
That's right.
Even if you move away from Dallas.
That's right.
Yeah. Hey, fellas, love you both. Respect you both highly. Same goes for Roundtree. Love the work you're doing. Keep it up. Thanks for being on Man to Men today.
Anytime. Thanks, brother.
Right. Man to Men is a creation of Beta Upsilon Chi, the nation's largest Christian fraternity. We're commonly referred to as Bucks. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's BYX.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and consider supporting our work with college men across the country. And you can do that by clicking the link in the show notes to support. And you can help us expand as well. Tell other men in your circles, maybe in your church, share about us on your socials. Our promise is to keep unique and in-depth conversations and biblical insight coming your way, men. We are produced, rather well, I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. Producer Bradley's at the helm over there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.